Davey, if you don't water these plants soon, they'll go and die right on you. It was Kevin Morris telling me what I already knew. Everything my sister planted last spring withered from neglect. Looks like I just didn't care enough about watering them. She probably spent a small fortune on those roses under the windows, not to mention the time she spent planting them in the flower boxes my ex-wife and I built. My sister Jane thought that roses could lift my spirits and get me out of my depression. It will not happen. Let these damn flowers die, like my wife's love for me. Dead, like my good friend Stuart Olson. We just buried Stuart today. Kevin and I gave the eulogies. There wasn't a dry eye in the chapel after Kevin finished his 10-minute speech. Then it was my turn. We planned it this way. Kevin brought them to tears, then I did my best to lighten the mood by telling a couple of stories from our time in the group. Kevin, Stuart, and I wrote The Yonder Blues Road. We did well at the regional level. We were busy most weekends and enough weekdays to attract a lot of fans. It was there that I met Sandy, the gorgeous blonde bombshell who would become my wife. At that moment, it dawned on me. Today was 1 year ago when I saw that terrible look on her face and heard her version of, "We need to talk." Could this really happen today? The 1-year anniversary of the end of my marriage and my best friend's funeral on the same day? All this flashed through my head in a matter of seconds as I unscrewed the caps from 2 bottles of beer. Kevin pulled Jack Daniels from the shelf and poured 2 shots. Kevin raised his glass. "Salute." "Salute," I responded to his toast to our friend, who was half Swedish, half Italian, and a long-suffering Vikings fan. We drank a glass of Jack and started drinking beer. "Hey, Davey, your hand is bleeding." I looked down, and sure enough, I must have cut my finger unscrewing the beer bottle caps. I grabbed a towel from the bar and wrapped it around the wound before heading to the bathroom where I keep my first aid kit. As I unwrapped the towel, I noticed the embroidery. Davey and Sandy, August 3rd, 2005. May you always love each other as much as you did on your wedding day. Her grandmother made and gave us a set of these ornaments as a wedding gift. I guess Sandy didn't bother to take them back with the rest she pulled out of here last year. Kevin noticed the look on my face when I returned from the bath. I was going to go home, but would you like me to stay? Shall we have another glass? No, buddy. Go home to your wife. These are always difficult days for spouses. Give Patty a hug for me and give her my love. With that, Kevin walked away, leaving me to reflect on how everything in my life had turned to shit. The Yonder Blues Road played in a small tavern in Madison. We had a crowd that evening. Lots of covers went well with some of our original tunes, good old-fashioned blues and rock. Stuart on drums, Kevin on bass and keyboards, and I sang and played guitar, a beautiful Les Paul signed by the man himself. It was supposed to hang on the wall in my office, but Mr. Paul himself told me that it would be a shame not to play such a beautiful instrument. So I did. Speaking of beauty, there in the crowd was the same blonde who was here 6 weeks ago when we last played this bar. She was about 170 centimeters tall, with long blonde hair, a sweet smile, and a stunning body clad in a tight tank top and skinny jeans. And when she danced, I got excited. Anyway, that night I did something that we only did on very rare occasions, and only when there was a lady in the audience with the right physique and dance moves. Remember Bruce Springsteen's Dancing in the Dark video where Bruce asks a random girl on stage to dance? Well, that's what I did to the blonde when we were covering a Springsteen song. And she did it. She danced, we played, and the crowd went crazy. She was still at the bar when the band finished their second and final encore. You don't have to hit me over the head with a brick to know that this lady was waiting for me. Kevin and Stuart gave me a break from sorting out my gear while I headed to the bar to introduce myself. We chatted for a few minutes before she gave me her phone number, asking me to call. Then she came out and I stared at her perfect ass in those jeans. Weeks later, the band had another show scheduled at a club in Madison. I called Sandy and asked if she was available for an actual date on Friday since we were playing on Saturday. She said yes, and I made a reservation at one of the best restaurants and bought tickets to the University Symphony Orchestra, I picked Sandy up at her house, and she looked absolutely gorgeous in her little black dress and heels, nothing slutty, just classy. I was glad that I was wearing a nice sports jacket and had shaved off the usual stubble from my face. Our conversation over dinner was light. We were just getting to know each other, our likes and dislikes. Sandy held my hand during the concert. She said I made the right choice. Beethoven was her favorite composer, and the Third Symphony was one of his two that she liked best. She said she was surprised the blues rock guitarist chose the symphony. I had to admit that in my youth I took 8 years of violin lessons and 4 years in our school chamber orchestra. I also admitted that I picked up the guitar because when I was a horny teenager, girls liked guitarists more than concert violinists. Sandy had a good laugh at this. After the concert, I took Sandy to a quiet lounge for a drink, and then went back to her house. As we stood in the doorway, I told her how much I enjoyed her company, and asked if she would be at the tavern on Saturday. "Will you be at the club tomorrow night, or can we have a cup of coffee after I finish?" "Sorry, Davey, I won't lie to you. I have plans for tomorrow evening, and it wouldn't be fair to him to cancel this late. I just had a great evening with you. But fairness is fairness. I hope we can do this again soon." I was disappointed. It was one of the best evenings I've had in a long time. I thought we really hit it off, but I held my tongue, not wanting to spoil a pleasant evening with too harsh statements. I quickly kissed her and left. The next night I tried my best not to let the disappointment affect our show, but I know it lacked energy because no one really cared when the last set ended without an encore, and we left the stage by 11. After loading my gear into the truck, I hit the road to rid myself of my fear. This turned out to be a bad idea, because as I was leaving the local coffee shop with a cup of coffee, I saw Sandy and some guy coming out of the jazz club across the street. The guy looked very familiar, possibly an athlete, given his height and build. They seemed very close, enough so that Sandy doesn't notice me. I sat at one of the tables on the sidewalk and watched them walk down the block. I would never have stooped to follow them, but there was no need to do so since they only walked half a block before entering a nice apartment building. I sat there, finishing my coffee and feeling sorry for myself before walking down to that building and looking at the list of names next to the call buttons. The name caught my eye, B. Johnston. That's why he seemed familiar to me. Benjamin, or more commonly known as Benny, Johnston was an All-American running back who was drafted by the New York Jets straight out of his senior year at Wisconsin. It was a pretty upscale building in the business district for a college student. Either some wealthy alumni were keeping Benny comfortable, or he had already started spending his multi-million-dollar signing bonus. I didn't stick around to see if Sandy was staying the night. I did what any self-respecting guy would do. I found a bar that was open late, ordered a double shot of whiskey, picked up a girl who recognized the rock star, and took her to my hotel room for the night, for sex. The next morning, I got into my car and headed home with the intention of completely forgetting about Sandy. I half expected a call from Sandy within the next week, and was somewhat surprised when I didn't receive one. What I didn't know was that Sandy's little sister Alice, a 16-year-old wild child, was found dead on the New York subway that Sunday, an apparent overdose victim whose friends got scared and just left her there. I learned about this family tragedy much later. While Sandy dealt with her sad family problems, I was oblivious, assuming Sandy had gotten a better deal with a wealthy professional athlete. I immersed myself in work and the group. We started getting more business in the greater Chicagoland area, so we were no longer making trips to Madison or western Wisconsin. Sandy became a distant memory. The memory was reawakened one night when our band was playing at a club on Belmont Avenue. I looked around the crowd and saw Sandy. Since she wasn't looking at me at that moment, I quickly looked away. At the next opportunity, I told Kevin and Stuart that I was changing the playlist, and we started with Dancing in the Dark, but instead of asking Sandy to come up on stage, I noticed a blonde beauty in the audience and asked her to come up. I tried my best to flirt with the blonde while she tried her best to act sexy. She wasn't bad, but she wasn't Sandy. When the song ended, I looked around the crowd again. Sandy was nowhere to be seen. My small act of retribution must have achieved its goal. but for some reason, I didn't get the satisfaction I was hoping for. I decided to take a chance. Her number was still in my phone's contact list. On Monday morning, I sent a message. Kevin said he noticed you on Saturday. Is there a reason you didn't say hello? 10 minutes later, the answer came. You seemed busy. Didn't want to interfere. Are you in town? Can we have coffee? I work for the administration of Northwestern Memorial, and my schedule is flexible, so tell me when. Then how about lunch? Gino at noon on Superior? Yes. This was the beginning of our relationship. We met for lunch, and Sandy told me why she had disappeared that week due to the death of her sister. When she asked why I hadn't called, I made up the lame excuse that I had been overworked that week, and that since she hadn't called me, I assumed she had better things to do. She never mentioned Benny Johnston, and neither did I, probably because it would reflect poorly on me. Was I stalking her? I knew I wasn't stalking, but what would she think? It wasn't the best way to start a relationship. A few white lies and subterfuges on my part, a few things she left unsaid. Since the lunch seemed to be a success, I invited her to the symphony on Thursday. Midori was scheduled to play Dvořák's violin concerto, and I had access to some great seats. Sandy said she would love to go, and from that evening we were a couple. Our physical relationship took several weeks to consummate. It was after a Sunday afternoon shopping trip on Michigan Avenue. Sandy asked me if she could take half an hour to herself and went into Victoria's Secret. We ate a light dinner at her place, and then she disappeared into the bedroom. Sandy came out in a sheer blouse and thong panties, then led me by the hand back to her bedroom. The lights were dim, and there were a couple of candles burning. Sandy began to undress me until I was naked. We had some good sex. We both climaxed, however. I'm sorry to say we didn't do it at the same time that first time, but I was hoping we'd have another chance to do it soon. We actually had better chances, both that weekend and in the days and nights that followed. Sandy and I discovered that we had quite a lot in common beyond great sex and music. We had a few problems, the main one being my time with the group. Between my job as a systems analyst and band rehearsals, playing clubs on the weekends only added to the time spent away from each other. Plus, even though Sandy said she trusted me, the whole groupie thing was a problem. Despite these problems, we still managed to get engaged a few months after we became exclusive. I proposed one summer evening right after a great Siegel Schwall reunion concert in Grant Park. Sandy said, yes, between kisses. I booked a nice room in the city center for this occasion. We celebrated our engagement in a Lakeview room with the curtains open. We made love, and then sat in bed with her head on my chest. She looked at me with her beautiful blue eyes. I love your touch. That's good, because I have every intention of playing with this body for the rest of my life. I was in heaven. At least until the Jets came to Chicago 6 weeks later to play the Bears in a preseason game. On the Thursday before the game, Sandy was very quiet while we ate dinner. To make matters worse, she made up some excuse to meet her colleagues for drinks on a Friday night after work. Alarm bells started ringing and light bulbs came on in my head. Sandy arrived around 10 p.m. and was still very quiet. After she fell asleep, I found her panties. I was glad that there was no sign that she was with another man. Maybe I didn't have anything to worry about after all, but I kept my feelings in check for the rest of the weekend. I was even more pleased when I checked her email while she was sleeping. There was a message from Benny begging her to see him again before he had to leave town with the team. Her answer read, "It's over between them. She's engaged. She loves her fiancé," and agreed to meet him on Friday, only to tell him about it to his face. She asked him to never contact her again. 3 weeks later, an event occurred that changed my life. Yonder Blues Road was playing at a great dive bar in Kankakee when 5 or 6 members of a motorcycle gang from Joliet showed up. The band had just finished their second set when there was a commotion in the back of the bar. Most of the bar's patrons were trying to understand what was going on, but I was in a hurry to get beer, so I stood with my back to the fight. Suddenly, I heard a characteristic click behind me. Before I could react, I heard another sound that I couldn't identify and felt a sharp pain in my arm. It turns out the click was the sound of a switchblade opening. One of the bikers intended to stab me in the back. For what reason? I could not imagine. The second sound I heard was Kevin's bass guitar hitting the biker in the back when he saw him coming at me with a knife. Kevin hit him hard enough that the knife missed its target. The cut on my arm was minor, but deep enough that I needed 12 stitches in the emergency room. Needless to say, this was the last straw for Sandy. I had to leave the group, otherwise, the wedding would not have happened. The biker never admitted why he targeted me. He ended up receiving 5 years in prison for a variety of charges related to the incident. It was all strange. Something was wrong, and it seemed like the whole episode was staged specifically to get at me. Or was I just being paranoid? Years later, I learned the truth. The band had a few shows that couldn't be canceled without significant financial penalties. So we renamed those last 6 shows the Goodbye Yonder Blues Road Tour, and then I parted ways, looking forward to life with Sandy, getting married, buying a house, renovating it, and making it our home. We had been enjoying marital bliss for over 2 years when everything went wrong. Sandy felt stuck in her job and had very little hope of advancement over the next few years. She was in her late 30s and wanted to wait a few more years before having children. At the same time, she hoped to make a decent career. Sandy tried every hospital in the area without success. She received a call from a talent hunter with an excellent prospect. St. Jude Children's Hospital in Memphis was interested in talking with her. We discussed this in detail. I could probably start looking for jobs in the Memphis area, but it may be a while before anything opens up in my area. Will our marriage remain strong if we live apart for a few months or so? Other couples have done it, so why not us? As a result, Sandy passed the interview, received a lucrative offer, and unfortunately, we decided to live in different cities for a while. This could have worked, if not for one hitch. 2 weeks after Sandy moved to Memphis, Benny Johnston was traded from the Jets to the Titans. Nashville and Memphis are 300 kilometers apart, otherwise I could have taken more initiative. Heck, I could just quit my job and move there. But I allowed events to happen that ultimately led to the end of my marriage because, although I thought 300 kilometers would be a barrier to pursuing Benny Sandy, he didn't think it was too far to travel. Something else happened during our separation. I received an email from Sandy's college friend, Davey. I heard about this website from an old friend. At first I thought the girl in the video was young Sandy, but then I realized it must be her sister. I didn't know how to approach Sandy, so I'm asking for your help in removing this from the website. Jason. The letter contained a link to an adult site. I hesitated before finally looking. I've never met Alice, but I've seen photographs. The young woman in the video was definitely Alice, and the first part of the video showed Alice with a woman in a sexual situation. I didn't watch the rest. I didn't want to, but I needed a family member with access to her birth certificate to contact the website to remove the video of Alice underage. Sandy was shocked when I told her. She deleted the video, sparing her parents another painful reminder of what their young daughter had become. Soon after, the relationship deteriorated. I assumed that we would reconnect after we moved in together again. I sent out more resumes to Memphis companies hoping to get offers. When Benny learned from mutual friends that Sandy was living alone in Memphis, he began his campaign. I don't know all the details, just the end result. In the 3rd month of our separation, I flew to Memphis for an interview with the company. Sandy picked me up at the airport, and it was obvious something was wrong. My interview went well, and I was offered the job. I took a taxi to Sandy's apartment, and when I walked in, I heard these sad words. "Davey, I'm sorry, honey. We need to talk." Part of my post-divorce depression was self-loathing for never being completely honest with Sandy. I never knew how to approach the topic of her relationship with Benny, a professional football superstar. I'm not a slouch physically. I have a decent body. I'm 185 cm athletic, handsome enough to attract the ladies. But how can any guy compare to a 6'1", 250-pound millionaire who's strong enough to play professional baseball? So, I probably did the worst thing anyone else could do without discussing the elephant in the room, to understand what demons Sandy was dealing with regarding Benny, and to calm those demons by speaking out about it. A year later, I was stuck in my depression, allowing the breakdown of my marriage to continue to weigh on me. I did not accept the job offer from the Memphis company and stayed here in Chicago. Sandy and I divorced, and she moved in with Benny. Stuart was hit by a drunk driver while riding his motorcycle home from work. The past year has passed too slowly. Why does time speed up when everything is going so fantastically, but slow down during difficult days, months, years? It just doesn't seem fair. One good thing did happen a month after Stuart's memorial service. Kevin played bass in a local blues band called the John Reginald Group. They were in the middle of recording when their guitarist was arrested for drug dealing. Kevin told John that I was free. John was familiar with my game and called me to see if it was right for me. That being said, I auditioned and took time off from work to help the band finish the CD. I once won John over when I suggested using an electric violin in one of the numbers. The next day, I brought my violin into the studio, turned on my best dad, John Creech, and cranked it up. The band and producer liked it, and the track ended up on CD. Perhaps it was the endorphins released that week in the studio, but suddenly everything started looking a little brighter again. The new attitude probably had a lot to do with what happened next. My sister Jane hosted a dinner party and introduced me to a woman from her work. Kate Morgan can only be described as a breath of fresh air. We sat next to each other during dinner, and I probably monopolized her time to the point that I was rude to Jane's other guests. It turned out that the others were just pleased to see me in such a good mood for a change. It's nice to have great friends. I did my best to find out everything I could about this pretty brunette, beyond what stood out to me physically. Her brown eyes, her bright smile, her athletic, build hidden beneath her conservative dress. She was 24 years old and had graduated from graduate school a year earlier with an MBA in finance. She worked with my sister last year and appreciated the way my sister mentored her. Most importantly, she was not currently dating anyone. Before Kate left, I invited her to go somewhere the following weekend. I must have done something right that night because she agreed to a date the following Saturday night. I will not bore the reader with all the details. I will only say that one date led to a second, third, and many others. I introduced Kate to my family, and she introduced me to her parents over the weekend, 2 months after we started dating. Kate came from a small town in Indiana, and her parents were fairly conservative Catholics. For the first time since graduating from high school, I went to church on Sunday Mass. I learned a lot about Kate that weekend. Things she was too modest to talk about herself. Her parents were very proud of their only child and more than cared for her. You could see the pride when her mother and father talked about Kate graduating high school as valedictorian, becoming homecoming queen and captain of the volleyball team, received a full scholarship to Loyola, and graduated as salutatorian. Up to this point, Kate and I had been limited to kissing and the occasional very heated smooch, but she wanted to take her time with the physical aspect of our relationship. She said that she would not have sexual relations with me until she understood that we loved each other and that this was something more than infatuation. As hard as it was, I liked this woman enough to respect her wishes. On the way home from her parents' house, she spent 3 hours answering my questions and filling in the blanks. I learned that she had only intimate relationships with 2 men. She dated the latter for 3 years during college. She knew she was different from most women of our generation, but she was comfortable with herself. She knew that many men stopped asking her out after a couple of dates because she didn't give in to their demands, and that was one of the things she loved about me, that I respected her and didn't force her to be something that she was not. I told her that sometimes it was hard to give up the intimacy of the physical relationship that I wanted us to share, but I loved her and hoped that someday soon we could share more than kisses. Kate gave me a big kiss on the cheek as we sped down the freeway at 110 kilometers per hour. I truly believe we would have consummated our relationship that evening if it weren't for the fact that Kate had a 6:30 flight the next morning and still needed to pack her things and get some rest. The last thing I wanted was to rush the moment. I dropped Kate off at her apartment and gave her a big hug and a good kiss. It was going to be a long week until she got home on Friday. We agreed that I would pick her up at O'Hare on Friday and we would have dinner at our favorite restaurant. During that same week, it became impossible to ignore what was happening in my ex-wife's life. The sports page was filled with news of Benjamin Johnston being released from the Titans because he failed another drug test. To make matters worse for dear old Benny, he was arrested for domestic violence that same evening. The newspapers did not name the victim, but Benny hit his partner and ended up in prison. I admit that I feel sorry for Sandy. She may have been a bitch for leaving me for Benny, but I don't think anyone deserves to be physically abused by their spouse. My relationship with Kate was now so strong that by Friday, I was barely thinking about Sandy's situation when I met Kate at the baggage carousel with a dozen red roses in hand. Kate almost knocked them out of my hands when she jumped into my arms and gave me the most passionate kisses. I made a reservation at Charlie's. Let's take your bag and go to town. Kate surprised me with her answer. If we go out for dinner, these flowers might start to fade. I have a better idea. Let's get some Italian steaks to go and eat at your place. I miss you and want to be alone with you. We took food and went to my house. We discussed our jobs. Kate's trip was a success and could lead to a promotion in the near future. After food, drinks, and conversation, Kate got straight to the point. Take me to bed, Davey. I want to make love to you tonight. We really made love. We were in no hurry. When I undressed her, I couldn't help but smile. What's so funny? Kate looked offended. It's not funny. I'm smiling like a fool because you have a beautiful body and I've been dying to see it since that night at my sister's. Now that I don't know whether to just watch or just hold it. It's hard to do both at the same time. Make love to it, was her answer. I didn't waste any time. It was slow and loving. All this time we hugged each other, kissed, and looked into each other's eyes. I felt her shudder, not from a stunning climax, but from a pleasant release. Immediately after that, I allowed myself to relax. We lay next to each other and her head rested on my shoulder. It felt so wonderful to hold the woman I loved in my naked arms again. I didn't cry, but I was incredibly touched. I filled the bathtub and we bathed together. Kate seemed shy at first, but I didn't let her back down. I made her get into the bathtub with me. We talked a little more about what that night meant to us. When the water cooled, I toweled us dry and took her back to bed. This time I slowly covered her body with kisses and then gave her pleasure. It wasn't like the first climax. It was amazing. This is exactly what I wanted her to experience. We made love again and fell asleep wrapped in each other under the covers. When Kate woke up the next morning, I was no longer asleep. I just lay there and looked at this beauty. Kate woke up and looked at me confused. This is the first time in my life that I slept naked. That was great. What do you want to do today? I hope we can spend the whole weekend together. Let's go to the park. I really need to go for a run after a week of traveling. You'll probably run circles around me. We can go running if you promise not to burn out like you usually do. There are other exercises I'd like to focus on tonight. Agreed? I'm going to stop by the house to get my running gear and some clothes if we're going to spend the weekend here. Shortly after this, Kate left. Refusing my offer to give her a ride, she took a taxi to her house and was due back in a couple of hours. I spent the next hour doing the usual weekend chores, wanting the house to look nice for Kate's return. An hour after she left, the doorbell rang. I was excited. Kate must have been so eager to get back that she cut her expected time in half. I opened the door and received a very unexpected surprise. Hello, Sandy. Hey, Davey, can I come in? I could only nod and step aside as Sandy, looking as beautiful as ever, walked through the door for the first time since packing up her personal belongings almost a year and a half ago. When I closed the door, Sandy hugged me. Davey, I was a fool and I'm so sorry. I love you and I want us to be together again. I want to become your wife again. Catherine Morgan grew up always trying to be a good girl, someone her parents would be proud to call their daughter. That's why, when her friends in high school told her about a porn actress named Katie Morgan, she immediately forbade anyone to call her Katie, and from that day on, went by Kate. The hardest part was convincing her father until she finally broke down and told him why. They both blushed and Dad never called her Katie again. And Kate was a good girl. Until last night, she had only 2 men in her life. The first was her high school boyfriend. They both lost their virginity on the night of their prom. Instead of going to an all-night party, Jeffrey booked a hotel room in the city, and they spent a pleasant night awkwardly losing their cherries. The second man was a guy she dated for 3 years in college. Their lovemaking was enjoyable, but the sex made her wonder what all the fuss was about. It was a combination of factors. It was now obvious to Kate that Howard was small, at least compared to Jeffrey or Davey. And Howard never tried to give her pleasure, like Davey did last night. Last night, Kate tried to stop Davey, but Davey didn't give up until he finally got his way. Now she knew why her friends liked sex. Her first night with Davey surpassed anything that had happened in 3 years with Howard. When Kate left Davey's house in the morning, she was already planning their wedding. She was glad that they waited to have sex until she realized that she was absolutely in love with Davey, and was sure that he had the same feelings for her. Everything that happened last night exceeded all her expectations. She planned to have sex with Davey when she returned from this latest business trip. It made the ride feel as slow as molasses. What she didn't expect was to enjoy sex so much. All this was so exciting for a girl who had kept her sensuality in reserve all her life. Kate walked into her apartment and tossed a week's worth of work clothes onto her bed. She ran around the apartment, gathering exercise equipment and enough casual clothing for the next 2 days. Grabbing the pajamas, she stopped and looked at them in her hand and smiled as she tossed them back into the drawer. "This is not necessary," she thought to herself. Kate hurriedly stopped long enough to water the houseplants, then carried her suitcase to her car and drove to Davey's house, trying her best to obey the speed limit and avoid running red lights. As she turned onto Davey Street, she was brought out of her euphoric state by a sight that nearly crushed her. There was a red Honda with Tennessee license plates in the driveway. Kate didn't stop. She continued to drive, but now with tears instead of a smile on her face. While Kate drove past Davey's house, Davey and Sandy were inside, discussing all the things they should have said before their divorce. I looked at Sandy. She was still beautiful, even with one black eye. "Tell me why, Sandy. Tell me why you left me for a guy who ends up beating you. I was so angry with you after you showed me the video with Alice. It doesn't make any sense now, but at the time I blamed you for bringing it to my attention." This was another thing that broke my heart for my little sister. I always thought that maybe I didn't do enough to help her. I projected my inability to save her onto you. At the same time, Benny started calling me just to talk. When I told him about the video, he suggested that you were spending your free time watching adult films instead of looking for a job in Memphis. Benny said a lot of things that shook my confidence in our relationship. He told me that it was common knowledge that the reason you were stabbed by that gang member was because you had sex with his lady. I let Sandy chat for a while, thinking about how this whole nightmare reminded me of some B movie I saw on TV late at night. Then I said my word. "Stay here. I want to show you something." I went to my office and selected 2 files. "Sandy, first, here is a printout of the email that Jason Taylor sent me. You can read that he was the one who notified me about the video. I saved a copy of his email in case I was ever suspected of viewing child porn. Notice how Jason calls the old friend who gave him the website address? When I ran into Jason last year, he told me the name of his friend. It was Benjamin Johnston." Sandy sat with her mouth open. I didn't let up. "Here's the report from the private investigator I hired after talking to Jason. Something doesn't add up about the biker who tried to stab me that night. Go ahead and read the statement he received from one of the gang that was at the bar that night." Samuel Archer, a private investigator hired by David Newman, met with Daniel Bailey, a member of the Diablos motorcycle gang based in Joliet. Mr. Bailey provided the following statement for a fee of $500, although he was adamant that he would never repeat this statement to law enforcement or under oath. Mr. Bailey confirmed that Benjamin Johnston paid him and his associates $7,500 to kill David Newman. The gang made the mistake of entrusting this task to one Joseph Burns as part of his initiation into the gang. The plan was simple: start a fight in one of the clubs where Amir Newman's band was performing, and Mar Burns would take advantage of the chaos to kill Mr. Newman with a knife. Mr. Burns failed due to the quick response of Kevin Morris, the bassist. Sandy finished reading and looked at me again with tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry. The only thing I never found out was why your boyfriend never made a second attempt." Sandy replied, "Well, it was around the time that Benny started dating that hip-hop diva. He probably forgot about me for a while, at least until she abandoned him when he was traded to the Titans. And then he started contacting you again?" "Yes, and I was stupid enough to answer his calls because he said he needed a friend to talk to. He used my friendship to undermine our marriage, and I let him do it. Can you ever forgive me? Can I please come home? I love you, Davey." I was looking at one of the most beautiful women I had ever known. The woman I loved with all my heart. A woman who needed a friend. My forgiveness and my love now more than ever before in her life. My heart and soul were begging me to be that friend, that lover, and that man big enough to forgive her lapse in judgment when she broke our vows and left me for another man. And damn, she must have undone those top 2 buttons on her sundress while I was in my office. Those 2 perfect breasts were half exposed and teasing me. I put my arm around her shoulders and pulled her towards me. "I forgive you, Sandy." I kissed her forehead. Sandy looked at me with all the hope in the world in those beautiful blue eyes. "I forgive you and wish you all the best for the future, but maybe someday you will understand that love is not a letter word that you use to get your way. I'm not saying this to offend you, but I'm truly in love with a wonderful woman who I plan to marry, and we'll start a family together. She became my support in this stupid world. She brought me back from the brink. I'm not going to betray her trust because you need me right now. I don't want you to get hurt, so please don't go back to Benjamin. Take some time, like I did, to get your bearings and heal. Physically, mentally, and spiritually, I wish you all the best." Sandy couldn't stand it. She lay on the couch, shaking and sobbing, until I decided to call her parents. They came. I explained that I accepted her apology, forgave her for leaving me for being an asshole, but refused to take her back. Luckily, her parents understood. They embraced her and took her to their home. After Sandy left with her parents, I looked at my watch. It was already past 3 in the afternoon. Kate should have been here hours ago. I dialed Kate's number and waited for her to answer. It was the longest 15 seconds of my life. When Kate answered the phone, she seemed distant. I asked her if I could pick her up. I needed to go to the mall, and I was hoping she could come with me. I needed her opinion before purchasing a gift for a special friend. Kate seemed reluctant, but agreed. I went to her house. She came out, got into my car, and we were at the mall 20 minutes before it closed. I took her to a jewelry store, and she looked confused. I knelt down. "Please choose your ring and marry me." Kate fell to her knees and hugged me. She kissed me like I had never been kissed before. Another 5 minutes passed before we rose from our knees. She chose a very simple design with a half-carat diamond. I told the saleswoman to put a full carat in the frame, and I would pick it up tomorrow. I toured with John Reginald's band for 2 months during our engagement. This tour kicked my travel habit, and no, I didn't sleep with any groupies. But the music bug stayed with me. Shortly after our wedding, Katie and I moved to Austin, where I work full-time in systems development. This allows me the flexibility to spend a few hours a month as a session guitarist and violinist. Oh, and plenty of time to be a proud and caring dad to the 3 children KTA and I were lucky enough to have. Yes, you read that right. At the wedding, her father approached her and asked, "Now that your last name is Newman, is it okay if I call my little girl Katie again?" The sweetest woman I know cried when she told her father everything was okay. All these years later, I still find myself singing that stupid Dean Martin tune. How lucky can one guy be? I kissed her and she kissed me. As one guy once said, isn't it a blow to the head? Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.